What if I told you that the most famous lost city on Earth, that sprawling jungle kingdom of breathtaking temples and forgotten roads, was never actually lost? What if the story you've heard, the one about daring explorers stumbling upon ancient ruins swallowed by nature, is just a tiny piece of the truth? A story conveniently shaped, perhaps, that hides a much deeper, more resilient reality? Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about Angkor. Deep in the green heart of Cambodia, hidden by a relentless jungle, lies Angkor. The name alone paints a picture, doesn't it? Giant stone faces, calm and mysterious, staring out from temple walls wrapped in the muscular roots of ancient trees. Angkor Wat, the crown jewel, is a stunning testament to an empire that once ruled vast lands, a civilization whose art and engineering still blow our minds today. This was the mighty Khmer Empire, flourishing for over 600 years, from the 9th to the 15th centuries, leaving its mark in stone across hundreds of square miles. We know Angkor through stories of its mysterious fall, its seeming abandonment, and its dramatic rediscovery. It's the ultimate tale of a kingdom swallowed by the jungle, a true lost world. But is that the whole story? Is Angkor's tale just about forgotten splendor and a lucky find? The stones themselves, and the echoes in the lives of the Khmer people, hint at something far more complex and compelling. For centuries, the main story has been one of sudden collapse and then nothing. A kingdom lost to time until Western adventurers hacked their way back in. This popular version, you've probably seen it in documentaries and travel shows, paints a romantic, almost tragic picture. But as we peel back the layers of legend, as we look past the overgrown walls and into the lasting spirit of a people, a different story starts to unfold. A story of survival, of adaptation, and of a kingdom that, in many vital ways, never really vanished from its inheritors. This isn't just a trip to see old ruins. It's an investigation into a stubborn historical misunderstanding, a quest to find the enduring soul of Angkor. Here's the core of what we're digging into today. We're challenging the deeply set belief that Angkor was a lost city, suddenly abandoned, swallowed by the jungle, and forgotten for centuries until European explorers stumbled upon its grandeur. Now, that narrative is definitely romantic, it's captivating, but it's not just incomplete, it's fundamentally flawed. It's a version of history that, often without meaning to, downplays the continuous connection the Khmer people have with their ancestral home and flat out ignores a lot of evidence. The whole idea of Angkor being lost and then rediscovered, that's largely a Western idea, one that really took hold during the colonial era. Why does this even matter? Well, this lost city idea, as exciting as it is for adventure movies, often has some pretty uncomfortable colonial baggage. It can suggest that the local people had somehow lost touch with their own amazing heritage, that their greatness had faded so much they needed outsiders to point out the wonders right in their backyard. This view tends to brush aside local knowledge and history, pushing the Western discovery as the only real way of knowing. It paints a picture of a great civilization that existed, vanished, and then, ta-da, a brave explorer brought it back to the world's notice. This effectively erases centuries of local interaction and reverence that never actually stopped. Our investigation is going to peel back this myth. We'll explore how the lost city story was born and why it stuck around. More importantly, we'll uncover the mountain of evidence, historical, archaeological, and cultural, that shows Angkor, especially its sacred heart, Angkor Wat, was never truly lost to the Khmer people. Sure, it changed, its political power faded, its people spread out, but it was never wiped from memory or stripped of its importance. The real question isn't just what happened to the bustling capital of the Khmer Empire, but how did the world get its story so wrong? Prepare to see Angkor not as a city that was lost, but as a legacy that's been cherished all along, and in many ways is still very much alive. To really get why the lost city myth has stuck around for so long, we first have to appreciate just how unbelievably massive and sophisticated Angkor was. Picture this: a sprawling city complex, not just temples, but palaces, homes, roads, and an incredibly advanced water system, covering an area as big as modern-day Greater London. At its peak, between the 9th and 13th centuries, this was the thrumming heart of the Khmer Empire. It might have been home to 1 million people, making it arguably the largest pre-industrial city in the world. The names alone are legendary. Angkor Wat, the world's largest religious monument, its famous 5 towers mirroring the sacred Mount Meru, the mythical home of Hindu gods. Built in the early 12th century by King Suryavarman II, it was first dedicated to Vishnu, a massive statement of its creator's spiritual and political power. Then you've got Angkor Thom, the Great City, a huge walled area built by the prolific King Jayavarman VII, with the mesmerizing Bayon Temple at its center, its giant stone faces smiling out enigmatically. And who can forget Ta Prohm, famously locked in the embrace of the jungle, its stones gripped by the snake-like roots of silk cotton trees. That image alone gives you that powerful, romantic vision of nature taking back what's hers. These are just the headliners. The area has 72 major temples and hundreds of smaller sites, each a piece in a giant puzzle of human creativity. The engineering skill on display is simply staggering. A complex web of canals, reservoirs, called barrays, and dikes created a sophisticated water system. This wasn't just for watering the vast rice fields that fed the empire. It also had symbolic and practical uses, with waterways acting like highways. The construction itself is a marvel. Huge sandstone blocks, quarried miles away, were moved and put together with incredible precision, then covered in intricate carvings of epic stories, heavenly dancers, and scenes of daily life. These weren't just buildings. They were declarations of power, faith, and the cosmic order. Now, the commonly accepted story then tells of a decline. By the 15th century, this vibrant capital started to fade. Several reasons are often given for this change. Long wars with nearby kingdoms, especially the Siamese kingdom of Ayutthaya, definitely took a toll. There's also evidence of serious environmental problems. Long droughts followed by intense monsoons might have wrecked the complex water system that was the city's lifeblood. Some scholars even point to a massive drought in the 14th century, followed by terrible floods, which would have destroyed crops and possibly made people lose faith in their rulers, whose power was tied to their ability to control the waters and ensure prosperity. On top of that, the rise of sea trade routes to the south started shifting economic power away from inland centers like Angkor, eventually leading to Phnom Penh becoming the new capital. This period of change, this decline in its role as the main political and economic center, there's no denying it happened. The population spread out, the grand infrastructure wasn't kept up like before, and the jungle, always there in this tropical climate, began its slow creep over many of the stone structures. It's this image of temples slowly being swallowed by nature, of a once mighty city fading from the world stage, that created the perfect conditions for the lost city myth to grow. The grandeur was so immense and its later quieting so dramatic that the idea of it completely vanishing became an almost irresistible story. But, and this is a big but, a drop in political status and a shift in population isn't the same as being lost or forgotten, especially not by the people whose identity was, and still is, so closely tied to this sacred place. So, this story of Angkor as a city lost and then dramatically rediscovered by Westerners. It's a powerful tale, but it's one that really needs a closer look. It mostly starts to take firm shape in Western minds in the mid-19th century, even though rumors and brief mentions of a magnificent stone city in the Cambodian jungle had reached Europe much earlier. Portuguese and Spanish missionaries and traders were some of the first Europeans to see Angkor. The Portuguese friar Antonio da Magdalena is on record visiting Angkor Wat around 1586, and the historian Diogo de Couto wrote down his descriptions. Couto himself wrote about Angkor as early as 1550. But these early encounters didn't really grab Europe's attention in a big way. They stayed as fairly obscure accounts, known only to a few historians and explorers. The person most famously, though incorrectly, linked with the discovery of Angkor is the French naturalist and explorer Henri Mouhot. When Mouhot got to Angkor in 1860, guided there, by the way, by local Khmers who knew the site very well, he was definitely not the first European to see its wonders. In fact, Mohat himself admitted in his travel journals that other Westerners, including the French missionary Father Charles-Émile Bouillevaux, had visited Angkor Wat at least 5 years before him. So why did Moho become the poster boy for the discovery myth? The answer is pretty much down to the power of his storytelling. Moho was a talented writer and a skilled artist. His journals, published after his death, were filled with vivid, exciting descriptions and detailed sketches of the temples, especially Angkor Wat. They totally captivated the European public. He described the ruins as grander than anything left to us by Greece or Rome, sparking the imagination of a continent already fascinated by exotic lands and ancient mysteries. His words painted a picture of a magnificent civilization that had seemingly vanished off the face of the earth, only to be unveiled by his adventurous spirit. This romantic image of a lone explorer hacking through thick jungle to reveal a forgotten marvel was incredibly attractive, and it fit perfectly with the dominant colonial thinking of the 19th century. At this time, France was expanding its colonial empire in Indochina. The story of a lost Angkor, rediscovered by a European, served some subtle but important colonial goals. As some historians point out, colonial powers often described great ancient cities in the lands they colonized as having been forgotten or abandoned by the current local populations. This framing could be used to suggest that the native people had fallen from a past glory, implying they needed the civilizing influence and guidance of the colonial power to bring them into the modern age. It was a way to legitimize colonial projects by contrasting a supposedly decaying present with a glorious, but lost, past that only Westerners could now fully appreciate and restore. So this lost city narrative often downplayed or completely ignored the fact that local people knew about and revered the site all along. It boosted Western awareness as the main, valid form of knowledge, unintentionally or sometimes deliberately, sidelining the fact that Angkor, especially Angkor Wat, was never really lost to the Khmer people. They had always known it was there. They continued to use it, to pray there, and to tell stories about it. What Mohat and later Europeans discovered wasn't the city itself, but its potential for Western study, tourism, and importantly, its usefulness in shaping a particular image of the region that suited colonial ambitions. The myth of the lost city, then, tells us just as much about 19th century European views as it does about Angkor's real history. It's a classic case of how history can be written or rewritten to fit the stories of those in power. The carefully built image of Angkor as a city lost to the world, especially to its own people, starts to fall apart when we look more closely at the historical and archaeological facts. The evidence overwhelmingly points not to abandonment and rediscovery, but to a continuous, though changing, Khmer presence and deep respect for their ancestral heartland. The strongest evidence against the lost city idea is the simple fact that Angkor Wat, the magnificent soul of the Khmer kingdom, was never truly abandoned. It changed from being the state temple of a Hindu god-king to a major Buddhist pilgrimage site, a role it still plays today. Throughout the centuries, even as the political capital moved and the wider city area saw fewer people, Angkor Wat remained a beacon of spiritual life. When French archaeologists and conservationists started their major work in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they found communities of Buddhist monks living right there in the temple grounds, keeping its sacred traditions alive. This wasn't a new thing. It was an unbroken line of use. And the connection wasn't just to Angkor Wat. Archaeological finds, like pottery from all over the greater Angkor region, show that people continued to live there, though probably in smaller numbers, long after the supposed 15th century collapse. This wasn't some ghost city swallowed by the jungle. It was a landscape where people kept living, farming, and worshiping, even if the empire's grand infrastructure wasn't fully maintained anymore. Khmer oral traditions and folklore are packed with stories that connect back to Angkor. Tales of kings and heroes returning to the ancient capital, or of its magical importance, were passed down through generations, keeping the memory and importance of the site alive in people's minds. This was no forgotten ruin. It was a revered ancestral place. Royal support also continued, even if it wasn't constant. Far from being forgotten by the Khmer elite, Angkor remained a symbol of their heritage and an important site. Inscriptions and records show that various Khmer royal families made trips to Angkor Wat. Amazingly, in the late 16th century, well after the supposed abandonment, King Ang Chan ordered the completion of intricate carvings on the northeastern gallery of Angkor Wat, finishing work that had been left undone since the 12th century. Later renovations also happened in the 18th century. These actions clearly show kings actively involved with the site, which pretty much disproves any idea of it being lost to Khmer leaders. What's more, Angkor was even used as a base for Khmer military campaigns against Siam, highlighting its continued strategic, if not central, importance. The idea that Angkor was unknown to the West before Muhat's highly publicized rediscovery is also an oversimplification. As we mentioned, the Portuguese friar Antonio de Magdalena visited Angkor Wat around 1586. His accounts, passed on by the historian Diogo do Couto, talk about its extraordinary construction, though he said he couldn't fully capture its grandeur in writing. Diogo do Couto himself wrote about Angkor in the mid-16th century. Other European missionaries, traders, and adventurers found their way to Angkor in the centuries between. While their accounts didn't cause the huge sensation that Muhat's did, they show that Angkor wasn't entirely hidden from the Western world. It wasn't so much lost as it was just not yet a hot topic of Western fascination. These earlier visits also highlight that Muhat was walking a path that, while not heavily traveled by Europeans, was certainly known to the local guides who led these foreigners to the temples. In recent decades, amazing archaeological technology has completely changed our understanding of Angkor's true size and complexity, further blowing holes in the lost city narrative. LiDAR, light detection and ranging technology, in particular, has been a total game changer. By scanning the landscape from the air, LiDAR can see through the dense jungle canopy and map subtle ground-level archaeological features that are invisible to the naked eye, or would take decades to find with traditional ground surveys. The results of LiDAR surveys at Angkor have been nothing short of mind-blowing. They've revealed a vast, intricately planned urban landscape stretching far beyond the central temple complexes. Scientists have uncovered a dense network of previously unknown roads, canals, farming systems, city blocks, and even more hidden temples and neighborhood shrines. These findings confirm that Angkor wasn't just a collection of giant temples, but a sprawling, low-density metropolis, with thousands of houses, monasteries, and palaces organized into a sophisticated grid. This wasn't a city that was lost and then found. Its true, immense scale was simply waiting for the right tools to show its full complexity, a complexity that was always there, under the earth and plants. These technologies show a city that supported a massive population, far larger than anyone had imagined just by looking at the stone temple remains. Excavations on the ground continue to turn up evidence that contradicts the idea of a sudden, total abandonment. Archaeological digs within Angkor Wat and its surrounding areas have found evidence showing that even if certain features fell into disuse for a while, these areas were often reoccupied or reused by the late 14th or early 15th centuries, the very period of the supposed collapse. Just recently in 2020, archaeologists discovered hundreds of Buddha statue fragments at Angkor Wat, dating from the 12th to the 19th centuries. This suggests a complex history of use, damage, and deliberate burial of sacred objects over a very long time. Discoveries at other sites within the park, like Srasrang, have also revealed artifacts showing use and renovation well into the 16th and 17th centuries. It's so important to distinguish between the decline of Angkor as the Khmer Empire's main political and population center and the idea of it being lost or forgotten. The capital did shift, mostly due to a mix of factors: environmental pressures like severe droughts and then devastating floods that crippled its intricate water system, ongoing wars, and the changing economic scene with the rise of sea trade favoring coastal cities like Phnom Penh. This led to a gradual emptying of the vast city area and less state-funded upkeep of its huge infrastructure. The wooden structures, palaces, houses, and administrative buildings where most people lived, rotted away in the tropical climate, leaving the tougher stone temples to stand against the encroaching jungle. But this transformation, this evolution from a bustling imperial capital to a still sacred site of pilgrimage and smaller settlements, is a world away from the romantic image of a city completely vanishing from human knowledge, only to be stumbled upon as a pristine, forgotten relic. Angkor changed, it adapted, its role evolved, but its spiritual heart, particularly Angkor Wat, kept beating. The Khmer people didn't lose Angkor. They simply started to interact with it in different ways that were less about imperial show and more about lasting faith and connection to their ancestors. The narrative shouldn't be about loss, but about resilience and transformation. So, here we are, at the heart of our investigation. And the evidence we've gathered forces us to say it loud and clear. The magnificent kingdom of Angkor, while it went through huge historical changes, was never truly lost to its own people. That captivating image of a city completely swallowed by the jungle, erased from memory for centuries until brave Western explorers found it. It's a myth. A powerful myth, no doubt, but one that hides a more subtle and, frankly, more respectful truth. Let's quickly go over the key evidence that takes apart this old story. First, and most importantly, the continuous Khmer presence and worship, especially at Angkor Wat. This sacred place was never abandoned. It transformed into a major Buddhist center, with monks keeping its traditions alive, unbroken, for centuries. Communities kept living in and around the wider Angkor area, their lives tangled with the ancient stones. Khmer kings continued to support the site well after the empire's political center moved, with documented trips and even new construction and renovations in the 16th and 18th centuries. That's not how you treat a lost and forgotten site. Second, the discovery by Westerners wasn't some single eureka moment of finding the unknown. Early European accounts from Portuguese and other travelers came centuries before Henri Mouhot made it famous. Mouhot himself was guided by Khmers who knew the paths to the temples like the back of their hand. His real achievement wasn't discovery, but rather his powerful way of describing and illustrating Angkor's wonders for a Western audience. An audience that was, at the time, hungry for tales of exotic, vanished civilizations. Third, modern archaeological science, especially with tools like LiDAR, has shown us the sheer, almost unbelievable scale of Angkor as a vast urban landscape. This wasn't just a few temples in the jungle. It was an extensive, sophisticated metropolis. This technology isn't finding a lost city. It's lighting up the already existing, though previously unmapped full extent of a known one. It's showing us the full picture of a place whose grandeur was always there, even if partly hidden by time and nature. And excavations keep showing evidence of reoccupation and reuse, not sudden, complete desertion. The story of Angkor being lost is largely the product of a particular way of looking at history, a Western, often colonial viewpoint that tended to romanticize the other and sometimes downplay the continuous heritage of local populations. This viewpoint often failed to see or properly value the ongoing local connection to such sites. It was easier and perhaps more convenient for the colonial story to imagine a grand civilization that had completely collapsed, leaving behind only mysterious ruins for Westerners to figure out and bring back to the world's attention. The truth, as we've uncovered, is far more complex and way more interesting. Angkor did not vanish. It transformed. Its role as a political supercapital faded due to a perfect storm of environmental disasters, military pressures, and economic shifts. But its spiritual and cultural importance for the Khmer people never died. They didn't lose their heritage. They adapted their relationship to it. What looked lost to outsiders, especially those coming in with preconceived ideas of discovery, was, in reality, a living, evolving legacy. The jungle did creep in, the wooden cities did decay, but the soul of Angkor, embodied in its stone temples and in the hearts of its people, endured. It's time to finally replace the myth of the lost city with the reality of a resilient kingdom. So why is it a big deal to dismantle the lost city myth around Angkor? Why spend so much time correcting a story that, for many, has defined this incredible place? Well, the implications are huge, affecting how we understand history, respect cultural heritage, and listen to voices that have often been pushed to the side. First, setting the record straight is an act of deep respect for the Khmer people and their unbroken connection to Angkor. To say Angkor was lost unintentionally suggests that its own inheritors somehow severed ties with it, forgot it. The reality is, the Khmer people have always been the guardians of Angkor, spiritually and often physically. Their rituals, their stories, their very identity are woven into these ancient stones. Recognizing Angkor as a continuously significant site, rather than a rediscovered ruin, validates their lasting heritage and challenges those old narratives that downplayed indigenous knowledge and continuity. It's about acknowledging that Angkor isn't just an archaeological wonder, but a living part of Cambodian identity and history. Second, challenging this myth makes us take a hard look at the colonial viewpoints through which much of the world first learned about places like Angkor. The lost city idea often helped legitimize colonial projects by painting local populations as having fallen from some past glory, thus needing the civilizing influence of Western powers. By understanding how these stories were built and whose interests they served, we get a more accurate and critical view of global history, moving beyond romanticized and often patronizing colonial-era interpretations. This updated understanding gives us a richer, more dynamic appreciation of Angkor's history. It wasn't a civilization that just winked out of existence. Instead, it went through a complex transformation, adapting to huge environmental, political, and economic pressures. The shift of the capital from Angkor to Phnom Penh wasn't an act of forgetting, but a smart adaptation. Angkor itself changed from being the empire's administrative and economic heart to cementing its role as its spiritual and cultural soul, a role it never gave up. This story of resilience, adaptation, and continuity is ultimately more compelling and more human than any tale of sudden, mysterious disappearance. Today, Angkor Wat stands proudly at the very center of the Cambodian national flag. This powerful symbol isn't a relic of a lost past, but a testament to an identity that has survived unimaginable storms and a connection that was never truly broken. It signifies an enduring legacy, a source of national pride, and a profound link to ancestors whose ingenuity and spirit continue to inspire. The story of Angkor, therefore, isn't one of loss and rediscovery, but of incredible endurance and transformation. It teaches us that great civilizations may change, their capitals may move, and their people may adapt. But their essence, their cultural and spiritual heart can keep beating strongly through centuries, often quietly away from the gaze of the wider world, until the world is ready to see not what it expects, but what has always been there. It reminds us to listen carefully to the silent stones, but even more so, to the living voices of those whose heritage they represent. The kingdom was never truly lost, because its people never forgot where to find it. If this journey into the heart of Angkor has challenged how you see things or revealed a history you never knew, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps us bring more stories like this to light. And if you're passionate about uncovering hidden truths and challenging the common stories of history, make sure to subscribe and click that notification bell. We've got many more investigations planned. What other lost histories or popular myths do you think need a closer look? Share your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below. We read every single one, and your ideas might just spark our next exploration. Thanks for joining us on this revelation.